In the shadows of history, behind castle walls, beneath stone floors, and under the cover of night, human pain was turned into a science. Whispers of strange machines echoed through villages. Some were made of iron, others of splintering wood, but all served one purpose: to break the human body and the human spirit. These weren't just tools of punishment, they were instruments of fear, built to control, silence, and destroy. From the 12th to the 19th century, an era many call the age of human cruelty, the use of torture devices reached disturbing levels of complexity. Victims were stretched until their joints tore apart, crushed bees, pierced by Seneath screw pikes, or slowly bled over hours. In many cases, these devices weren't used to punish proven criminals. They were designed to force confessions, even if the accused had done nothing wrong. The cruelty wasn't hidden. It was public. Spectacles of pain became tools of power. And fear, not justice, ruled the day. Today, many of these devices sit silently in museums, untouched but unforgettable. Their wooden frames and iron teeth may have gone cold, but their stories still send chills down anyone who dares to look closer. And the deeper we go, the darker it gets. Keep watching, because each device we uncover will be more disturbing than the last. The Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle or chair was a medieval torture device specifically designed to inflict both physical and psychological torture. This gruesome invention consisted of a pyramid-shaped seat on which the victim was forced to sit, with their body weight causing extreme pain. This method was not only designed to cause suffering, but also to instill fear in those who witnessed it. In this way, the torturer would use the cradle to get information from prisoners by torturing their fellow prisoners and making them watch. What made this device horrific was the fact that it prolonged suffering for hours, days, or in some rare cases, even weeks. The exact origin of this device is a bit disputed, but according to historians, its use first began in the Middle Ages, and the last known devices were used in Spain during the Spanish Inquisition of the 15th century. The Iron Maiden. If you have seen movies or shows depicting medieval times, I can bet that you must have come across the infamous Iron Maiden. One of the most talked about and documented devices of torture in recent history, this device consisted of a solid iron cabinet with a hinged front and a spike-covered interior. It was tall enough to enable a normal person to stand in it. Victims were placed inside the Iron Maiden, and as the door closed, the spikes impaled the body in non-fatal locations, causing extreme pain and a slow death. Some historians believe it was designed to psychologically terrify rather than physically execute. Although this device has been excessively shown in pop culture, no evidence has yet been found of the existence of Iron Maidens before the 19th century. However, some ancient reports show that the Spartan tyrant Nabis used a similar sort of device around 200 BC for extortion and murder. The Abbasid vizier Ibn al-Zayyat also had a similar device, but instead of iron, this one was made from wood. Ironically, Zayyat's torture device would be used during his own imprisonment and execution in 847. Many historians argue that the actual device was much different and a lot less painful. According to these experts, excessive representation in pop culture has heavily altered the actual image of this device, and today's device shown in museums is a much exaggerated version. But if you think this was horrible, then wait for what's coming next. The rack. Imagine someone is pulling you apart to such an extent that your bones come out of your joints. As painful as it may seem, this is exactly what the rack did. Commonly used in medieval times to punish criminals and to force confessions from people in the case of treason and witchcraft, the rack was one of the most frequently used torture devices in the medieval period. Now, the structure of the rack was a wooden frame that was a bit raised from the ground, with a roller at one or both ends. The victim's ankles were tightly fastened to one roller, and the wrists were chained to the other. During the interrogation or punishment, the top roller was used to slowly retract the chains, which in turn would increase the strain on the prisoner's shoulders, hips, knees, and elbows and cause extreme pain. The device also has pulleys and levers that would strain the ropes to such a level that the victim's joints would dislocate and eventually get separated. The exact origin of the rack is still unknown, but according to historians, the first examples of a similar structure were found in Greece. In England, the rack made its first appearance in 1447 when it was used by John Holland, the second Duke of Exeter. In addition to England, Russia was also another civilization where the rack was used to get confessions from prisoners. By the end of the 18th century, the general thinking towards torture began to change a bit, and eventually, the usage of the rack became less common. This horrendous device was officially outlawed in many European nations by the late 1700s, and this marked an end to the terror of the rack. The Scavenger's daughter. Well, you saw how painful excessive stretching could be. Now, what about excessive compression? This is exactly how this torture device worked. This weirdly named device was invented during the reign of King Henry VIII of England by Sir Leonard Skevington, who was the Lieutenant of the Tower of London. Now, the basic working principle of this device was exactly opposite to the rack, as instead of stretching, the Scavenger's daughter tortured its victims by compressing them. Structurally, the device consisted of a metal rack that was shaped into an A-frame. The victim's head was strapped to the upper end of the A, the hands at the midpoint, and the legs at the lower ends. The frame could fold, swinging the head down and forcing the knees up into a sitting position, compressing the body, which would force blood from the nose and ears. There are many accounts of the usage of this device against Irish rebels, priests, and war criminals during the 16th and 17th centuries. By the end of the 17th century, with the development of the judicial system, many torture devices, including the Scavenger's daughter, became unfavorable for use, and today, one such device can be seen by visitors in the Tower of London Museum, the Brazen Bull. If we're on the topic of weirdly named torture devices, the Brazen Bull has to be mentioned. The Brazen Bull, also known as the Bronze Bull, Sicilian Bull, or Bellowing Bull, was a device used for execution and torture in ancient Greece. The bull had a completely hollow structure and was made entirely of bronze with a small door on one side. During the punishment, the victim was locked inside the device with their head in the same direction as the bull's head. After this, a heavy fire was set beneath the whole structure, which caused the metal to get so hot that the person would literally get roasted to death. To make the whole scene even more horrifying for the public, the bull had an internal acoustic apparatus that converted the screams of the dying victim into what sounded like the bellows of a bull. Moreover, the bull was designed in such a way that the steam from the cooking flesh of the victim would escape through the bull's nostrils. This smoke, along with the sound from the bull, would give an illusion that the bull had come to life during every execution, hence the name Brazen Bull. Now, unlike most of the other torture devices, in the case of the Brazen Bull, most historians are pretty divided. According to some, this device wasn't actually used and was only exhibited to instill fear among the enemies, while according to the others, the use of such devices actually occurred. Some Christian sources claim the Romans used this torture device to kill some influential Christians, including St. Eustace, who, according to Christian tradition, was roasted in a brazen bull with his wife and children by Emperor Hadrian. Some of the last accounts of this device were seen in the early 12th century, after which the brazen bull became completely non-existent. But you see, not every torture device operated on such a complex mechanism. Sometimes a thing as simple as a wheel was used to inflict pain on its victims, the breaking wheel. And this brings us to the breaking wheel, also known as the execution wheel or Catherine's wheel. This device is one of the oldest known torture devices. The wheel was used for execution in many medieval civilizations, including Rome, England, France, Germany, and Sweden. So, the execution wheel was a large wooden spoked wheel, which was sometimes modified with a rectangular iron thrust attached and extending like a blade from part of the rim. The primary goal of this device was not death, but agonizing mutilation of the body. Most commonly, the torture would start with breaking the legs, for which the executioner dropped the wheel on the shin bones of the convicted person, and then moved towards the arms. For every victim, the style, rhythm, and number of beatings were different as prescribed according to the laws of that time. Sometimes sharp-edged timbers were also placed under the convict's joints, which would increase the level of pain. Such methods were often used to torture prisoners who had committed serious crimes. After doing this for some time, prisoners were tied to the wheel, and the wheel was then erected on a pole just like a crucifixion. In some cases, the executioner was allowed to decapitate the prisoner while he was still on the wheel, after which the body remained on the wheel for scavenging animals, birds, and decay. By the early 19th century, the usage of the breaking wheel became quite infrequent, and the last known execution by this form was done on 13 August 1841, the thumbscrew. Apart from the wheel, another simple torture-inflicting device of that period was the thumbscrew. Also known as thumbkin, this ancient device was commonly used during witch trials. The thumbscrew basically consisted of a simple vise with protruding studs on the interior surfaces. During trials, thumbs, fingers, or toes of the victims were placed in the vise and slowly crushed. The crushing bars were sometimes lined with sharp metal points to puncture the nails, causing even more pain. The common designs of this device had space for a single thumb or big toe, but some variants could accommodate both big toes, all 5 fingers of one hand, or all 10 toes at a time. According to historians, this device was first developed around the 15th century in Germany. It quickly became popular because it was simple, easy to use, portable, and highly effective in getting confessions. Later on, from the mid-16th to the 18th century, the use of thumbscrews became even more common due to an increase in the slave trade, where it was commonly used on slave ships to punish slaves who defied orders or tried to escape. By the end of the 18th century, the existence of the thumbscrew became quite rare, and slowly the device completely disappeared. Let me ask you a question. So, what is your favorite fruit? Because if it's a pear, I'm afraid it won't be after hearing about the next instrument. The Pear of Anguish. The Pear of Anguish, or the choke pear, is a device that is said to have been used in the early modern period. This small, flower-shaped device opened through a screw mechanism and was inserted into a victim's mouth, anus, or vagina. With each turn, the device expanded, which would in turn tear apart the flesh internally. The metal body of the device was divided into spoon-like segments that could be spread apart with a spring or by turning a key. In terms of the origin of the pear, not much could be said exactly, but there are some mentions of a similar device in the 16th century. Further mentions of the device appear in the 19th century in a book called Gross's Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue. Later on, the superintendent of police and chief inspector of the Detective Bureau in Boston also mentioned this device in his book in 1897. Today, many pears can be seen in museums throughout Europe, but there is little to no evidence of their use. However, these devices do not match the descriptions given by various historians or 19th century sources. Crocodile shears. Now, the breast ripper wasn't the only gender-specific torture device of the olden times. While the ripper used to instill fear in women, its counterpart shears was enough for men to lose their sleep. The crocodile or alligator shears were an instrument of torture used in late medieval Europe. Historically, the device was commonly used against people who attempted to assassinate the king. The shears were basically made of iron and were based upon the concept of pincers, but instead of standard jaws or blades, crocodile shears ended in a pair of hemicylindrical blades, which, when closed together, formed a long, narrow tube. The insides of the blades were lined with several teeth or spikes. During the punishment, the whole structure was heated red hot, after which the crocodile shears were applied to the erect penis, and slowly and painfully the penis would get torn from the prisoner's body. In most cases, the death would be immediate. However, sometimes it would take some hours and the victim would die even more painfully due to blood loss. The last known use of crocodile shears occurred in Europe in the 16th century, after which the device became a part of books only. The Spanish chair. While many executioners used torture just to get confessions or to punish prisoners who had committed serious crimes, there were some for whom torture was more than this. For these people, causing a slow, painful, and agonizing death was the main focus of punishment. For this purpose, these kinds of people developed different types of torture devices throughout human history. One such device was the Spanish chair. As evident by the name, the Spanish chair first appeared in Spain and some parts of Italy. This device was basically a metal chair upon which the victim was seated, and then the chair was placed over an open flame. The chair would quickly get heated, and the victim was slowly and painfully roasted alive. Some versions of the chair had some painful additions like small sharp spikes that lined the back, seat, armrests, and leg rests. The number of spikes would often range from 500 to 1,500 depending upon the cruelty of the executioner. The device, as suggested by its name, was common in Europe, but some of its versions were also used in China and Russia. In Europe, the crimes that were punishable by the iron chair included adultery, murder, and witchcraft. In the mid-1800s, the usage of the Spanish chair completely stopped in Europe. But this wasn't the only device designed to give a slow death. The Heretic's fork, another device that served the same purpose, was the Heretic's fork. This device too was invented in Europe during the 15th century. It consisted of a collar with a sharp fork that had two ends. One end of this fork was placed under the victim's chin while the other one was pressed against the chest or sternum, and the collar was strapped around the neck. The pointy ends of the fork prevented any type of head movement or sleep, causing both physical and psychological pain. The device became very popular for getting confessions during the period from the 15th to the 18th century. Spanish boot. You may have noticed in this list that apart from the punishment, one of the biggest purposes of any type of torture was getting a confession. Now, according to scriptures, when it comes to making someone confess, there are few things as successful as the Spanish boot. Sometimes also called as the brodequins, this boot was a medieval torture device that was used to inflict immense pain on its victims. Now, little is known about the time and period of the invention of this device, but its origins date back to medieval times when it was commonly used to extract confessions from prisoners. The boot was basically made of metal or wood and consisted of 4 pieces of a narrow wooden board nailed together to fit the victim's leg. Wedges would be hammered between the boards, creating pressure that would increase until the victim confessed or lost consciousness. Some variations of the boot included iron casings with wood or iron wedges, while there were some that used boiling oil, molten lead, or hot coals to cause burns. Commonly, the boot was used in Spain and surrounding countries, hence the name. And this brings us to the last device of the video. Now I have kept this one of the last because, as far as my opinion is concerned, I believe that this one is by far the most painful torture device ever used on humans. So let's take a look. Head crusher. As the name suggests, the head crusher is one of the most extreme and cruel torture devices of human history. This structure was made entirely of metal and consisted of a plate that was placed below the victim's jaw and was connected by a frame to the head cap. As the torturer slowly twisted the handle, the gap between the head cap and plate decreased, which painfully crushed the skull, including the teeth, mandible, and facial bones. In this method, death would occur within minutes, but sometimes even if the torture stopped before death, the extreme damage to the facial muscles and structure would have occurred. In some horrifying cases, the eyes of the victims would fall out of their sockets. For this purpose, some variations had a receptacle in the front to catch the eyes of the victim. The exact timeline of the usage of the head crusher is not yet known, but archaeological evidence suggests that the device was last used sometime between the 15th and 16th centuries. Fortunately, by the end of the 19th century, a somewhat raw form of today's judicial system had come into place, and most of the societies around the world stopped using such devices, at least publicly. According to historians, this dramatic shift from torture and pain happened because of revolutions in France and America and the rise of human rights. Some experts believe that devices such as electric chairs are modern forms of ancient torture devices, and that the world still hasn't truly moved on from its old ways. Let me know in the comments about the device that horrified you the most, and make sure to like, subscribe, and share.